When most people picture a Native American battle, they probably imagine chaotic charges across an open plain, warriors on horseback, painted faces, fierce and screaming, and a battle that looks more like a Hollywood spectacle than real history. But what really happened when these nations fought was far deeper, far more tactical, and often very different from what most movies show. And here's where it gets surprising. These battles weren't just mindless clashes. Every move was calculated, every cry carried a message, and every weapon had its purpose. Long before the first war club swung or the first arrow flew, scouts had already spent hours, sometimes even days, studying the enemy. They'd read every footprint, sniff every fire pit, and listen to the birdsong overhead because it could signal movement. Combat was part skill and part spiritual practice, and understanding that is key to seeing these battles as they truly were. And what happened after the first clash would shock most people, because the battle wasn't necessarily about total annihilation. Some nations fought to control hunting grounds, others fought to make a bold political statement, and many fought to send a powerful warning. It was often as much about reputation and honor as it was about bodies on the ground. And the most surprising part? Even the kinds of weapons they chose had deep cultural and personal meanings. Whether it was a bow carefully carved over a winter or a war club handed down by ancestors, these were sacred tools of tradition, as much as they were instruments of war. Yet, as we'll discover in a moment, one of the most critical factors wasn't the weapons or even the warriors themselves. It was something most people never see coming, something that decided battles long before the fight even began. So what was that hidden element that could change the outcome before the fight even began? Because this one will completely change the way you see Native American warfare forever. That secret weapon that decided so much before any arrow flew? It was the scouts, the eyes and ears of the fight. Before a single warrior ever painted their face, scouts slipped like shadows across hillsides and through valleys, moving without sound. They weren't just looking for enemy tracks or smoke from cooking fires. They were reading the land itself. The way a deer had been scared from its path, or the silence of birds after a nearby human movement, told them more than most modern maps could. Every stone out of place and every unfamiliar print was a clue. Scouts were trained from childhood to read these signs like an open book, using them to anticipate where the enemy might strike and which paths would allow their own war party to vanish into the landscape. But it went deeper than simply spotting an enemy. Scouts also shaped how the fight would happen. They decided where to fight, choosing places that gave them the advantage: hillsides, riverbanks, dense forests, or open grassland. And they kept a secret no one outside the war party ever learned. Sometimes the battle was decided before the enemy even knew they were there. Scouts would return and whisper their findings to the chief or war leader, who would craft a plan not based on brute strength, but on knowing the land better than anyone. They might choose to attack at dawn when mist covered the ground, or wait until their enemies crossed a particular ridge, thinking they were safe. And if you thought warriors rushed into every fight swinging and whooping, they could wait days for the perfect moment. Patience was their power. But here's where it gets even more surprising. These warriors weren't just reacting to the land, they were reading something even deeper: the spirits of the place. And those spirits would often decide everything. Stick around, because next we'll uncover the ritual side of these battles that most people never see. And it will send chills up your spine. Before any plan was set in motion, there was one more ritual that could make or break the coming fight, a ritual that most movies completely leave out. Warriors and leaders would seek guidance, not only from scouts, but also from shamans and elders, men and women who could interpret dreams, read omens, and call upon ancestors for insight. You see, battles weren't just physical confrontations, they were spiritual encounters too. A warrior might fast for days before a fight, or spend an entire night sitting silently under the moon, hoping to receive a vision that told him what the outcome would be. Some believed that a good omen, like an eagle soaring overhead, could mean victory was certain. Others would take a dream of defeat as a sign to change tactics or call off an attack entirely. And this wasn't superstition to them, it was strategy. They knew the power of belief could rally an entire group or crush its spirit before they even reached the battleground. Imagine entering a fight convinced your ancestors already blessed you. Wouldn't that change everything? And some of the most intense preparations involved sacred items, painted shields, medicine bundles wrapped in leather, feathers that had been passed down through generations. These weren't mere trinkets. They were considered alive with power. To lose one in battle wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was a personal, spiritual loss that could haunt the warrior forever. But the most fascinating part? Some battles never even happened because of what these rituals revealed. Leaders would sometimes call off a raid if a shaman's vision was troubling. And that raises a question most people never ask. What happens when war is decided without ever drawing a weapon? The answer will show you a completely new side of these peoples, one based not only on courage, but deep wisdom. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Imagine warriors painted for battle, their hearts pounding, and their hands wrapped tight around their weapons, only to be told to stand down. It happened more often than most history books or movies would ever admit. And the reason was simple. Sometimes wisdom mattered more than war. When signs or omens suggested defeat, or when elders decided the timing was wrong, an entire plan could change overnight. Some leaders decided that losing even one warrior was too high a price when food was already scarce, or when winter winds whispered of harder days to come. That's because Native American leaders understood that a failed raid wasn't just a loss of face. It could spell disaster for an entire village, especially during lean seasons. Courage wasn't measured only in battle, but also in knowing when to wait. It was knowing that sometimes the greatest victory was surviving to fight or hunt another day. And here's where the movie myths really fall short. These people weren't driven by the blind thirst for glory. Every fight was part of a larger cycle, one of seasons, spirits, and responsibilities. That's why you see so many historical accounts of battles that end with warriors simply withdrawing after making a bold gesture or demonstrating skill, because making a point was often more important than wiping out an enemy. And that leads to one of the most surprising facts of all. Not all Native American warfare was about killing. In fact, there were battles where the goal was to touch your opponent, not kill them, just to show you could do it. This was known as counting coup, and it was a tradition built around skill and honor. And the next part of our story? That's where this practice takes a wild twist, one that reveals the true heart of Native warfare. And you might never look at these battles the same way again. Curious how a simple touch could mean more than an arrow. To most outsiders, a battlefield is all blood and iron. But not always. Among many tribes across the plains and beyond, one of the most prestigious things a warrior could do was count coup. Coup, pronounced like coup, was a game of courage where warriors would get as close as possible to an enemy without killing them, often close enough to touch them with a hand, stick, or coup staff, because skill and bravery were valued higher than simply spilling blood. To rush into the heart of danger and come back alive was a feat that earned you respect, not just for what you did, but for what you didn't do. It proved you weren't fighting for rage or revenge. You were fighting for honor. A warrior who counted coup would mark it on his clothing or weapon, a painted feather, a notch carved into his shield, as a visible sign of his bravery. It was a kind of record-keeping that told the story of his courage long after the dust had settled. Even enemies would recognize the feat, and this wasn't just showboating. It had practical value, too. Imagine facing someone so fearless they'd dare touch you in the middle of a fight. That could shake your confidence, make you hesitate next time. That was the psychological power of coup. And here's where it gets fascinating. This tradition wasn't just for men. Women could also earn respect for their own forms of courage and endurance, whether it was protecting children during a raid or showing grit in the face of hardship. This focus on honor over bloodshed surprises a lot of people who grew up with only Hollywood versions of native battles. But here's the twist. As European contact increased, this tradition of honor started to collide with new kinds of warfare: guns, cavalry charges, and tactics that ignored these sacred codes. And that's where the story takes a darker turn, one most people never hear about. Stick around, because next, we're going to uncover the devastating impact these changes had on the way wars were fought and what was lost forever. Before European contact, most Native American battles followed their own time-honored rules. Wars had purpose, ritual, and often an understood end. But as Europeans pushed deeper into indigenous territories, bringing guns, steel, and new ambitions, all those customs were shaken to their core. Suddenly, the battlefield wasn't the same kind of arena anymore. Firearms didn't care if you were brave enough to touch an enemy without killing him. Cannons didn't care about the centuries-old practice of counting coup. And this is where the real heartbreak began. Warriors who were masters of their craft, warriors who could track in silence, strike with speed, and disappear into the hills, were faced with guns that could kill them before they ever got close. Many of the sacred codes of combat vanished under the thunder of musket fire. And the most tragic part? Even as they adapted, the balance shifted. Whole villages would fight not for honor anymore, but simply to survive the next raid or the next army. Tribes that once met as rivals under shared traditions were now forced into alliances against an entirely new threat. And as if this wasn't enough, European powers often manipulated these rivalries, arming one side, turning them against another. What was once a measured dance of power, skill, and ritual became a scramble in the dark. And warriors had to change too, trading bows for guns, ambushes for set-piece battles, and old codes of honor for raw tactics that reflected this harsh new reality. It was a bitter transformation, one that left many elders mourning what had been lost. But the story doesn't end there. Even as they changed, they found new ways to hold on to their identity. And those new ways of resisting weren't on the battlefield at all. And that's exactly what we'll explore next: how culture survived even when the battles did not. And believe me, what you're about to hear next is a form of courage most people never recognize. When we talk about Native American warriors, we often picture the fight. But some of the most powerful stories come after the weapons have been set down, in the fight to keep a people alive. As European and later American forces took control of indigenous lands, the fight became one of endurance, resilience, and quiet strength. Whole tribes were pushed onto unfamiliar territories. Treaties were signed, often broken, and starvation was used as a weapon. That wasn't the end of their story. This is where courage took a different shape. Imagine keeping alive the stories of your ancestors, sharing their songs around campfires, teaching your children the names of sacred places even after they'd been renamed by strangers. Every word of your own language, every prayer whispered, became a kind of resistance. And warriors who once faced their enemies on the field began to face them in council halls and diplomatic meetings. They had to fight not with arrows, but with treaties and legal arguments. Many traveled long distances, sometimes all the way to Washington, D.C., to speak before lawmakers who barely listened. And that was its own kind of battlefield, one that required immense patience and endurance. In this new world, staying true to yourself became an act of war all its own. And here's what most people never hear. Even after so much was lost, many leaders successfully defended pieces of their homelands, saved sacred sites, and kept their traditions alive despite centuries of pressure. That's the kind of strength most movies never touch. a battle fought with quiet dignity that continues to this day. And what they did next? That would change the future, not just for their own people, but for all of America. And that future, believe it or not, starts with the next generation of warriors, those who decided to fight with words, art, and memory. You won't believe what they achieved, so keep watching. By the time the 19th century turned into the 20th, something truly remarkable was underway. Native leaders, who had grown up hearing stories of battles long past, began to realize that their fight was moving into new spaces: law, education, literature, and public life. And these new warriors weren't carrying tomahawks. They carried pens and papers, typewriters and cameras. They wrote speeches that challenged injustice. They told their own histories so that their children wouldn't have to learn them from textbooks written by strangers. And they became teachers, not just to their own people, but to the entire world, making sure everyone heard the true stories of these battles and treaties and their broken promises. Some went even further. They became lawyers and lobbyists, standing face to face with lawmakers and judges to argue for the return of lands and the recognition of tribal rights. Others became artists and performers, using their work to make people feel the heartbeat of a culture that had survived against every odd. And here's the part most people miss. This was every bit as brave as facing musket fire, because it wasn't quick or easy. It took years. Some never saw the results of their efforts, but every speech given, every article published, every child who learned their own history, and those victories continue to ripple across the generations even now. That fight is far from over. And that brings us to one of the most powerful kinds of battles today, the fight for sovereignty and self-determination in a modern world. And what these leaders and warriors are doing now will shock you, because their strategies and tools have changed, but their determination hasn't. And what happens next? That's where this story truly comes full circle. Stick around. You won't believe the warriors of the present day. You might think the days of Native American battles are long past, but in many ways, they never ended. The battle just changed its face. Today, indigenous communities fight for clean water, to protect sacred lands like Standing Rock and Bears Ears, and to have a voice in decisions that impact their futures. The fight is in the courtroom and at the ballot box. It's in the hands of grassroots organizers who camp on cold hillsides for months to make sure their land isn't desecrated. And just like the scouts of old, they read the signs. They know the risks. They know that every inch of ground they stand on carries the footprints of ancestors who fought before them. And they fight with the same resolve. Because losing these battles means losing more than a patch of land. It means losing a connection that has kept their people going for centuries. That's why they endure tear gas and rubber bullets, lawsuit delays, and political double talk. And here's what most people don't realize. Even these modern struggles still draw strength from the past. Every chant at a protest, every circle of dancers at a rally, carries the memory of those who fought before, using tradition as both armor and inspiration. And these fights are not in vain. Tribes have won legal protections for water and forests. They've built tribal colleges to preserve language and tradition. They've elected their own representatives who fight every day to reclaim a voice long denied. And this story, this ongoing fight, is one that will shape the future of the United States as much as its past ever did. And that brings us to the most surprising part of all. If you want to know the true legacy of these battles, the one that continues to echo into the future, stick around. You won't want to miss what comes next. And so, we come full circle. The battles fought by Native Americans weren't just struggles over land or pride. They were battles to protect a way of seeing the world that still survives. That legacy lives in their children, their elders, their artists, and their storytellers. Every traditional dance, every revitalized language class, every song sung at a powwow, is a continuation of those ancient struggles, and they remind us that endurance can matter even more than victory, that sometimes winning means never forgetting who you are. And that's something every one of us can learn from. Because these weren't stories about a vanished people. They are stories about resilience, about courage and identity. And those lessons matter as much today as they ever did. And here's the most powerful part of all. These battles shaped this continent. The nations who fought them shaped America, whether America admits it or not. Every treaty, every resistance movement, every legal fight became part of this shared history. And that's why, if you listen closely enough, if you stand at an ancient meeting place, or look into the eyes of someone still telling these stories, that endurance, that unbreakable link between past and future. And if you thought this story was over, and as you click off this video, remember one thing. There are still battles being fought today, not with arrows and rifles, but with voices, laws, and culture. And those warriors are still here, still determined, still strong. And that, more than anything, is the real story, the one most movies never told you.